many others in those categories because they'll take a question or a statement and form doctrine around it. For instance, there's several statements in this book that indicate that when we die, that's it. And is there life after? Now, Job does that too, but for some reason, this book is used to perpetuate some of those false teachings or false beliefs. It's very unique in that it's going to force us to look at life and see it without God and see it with God. Solomon, I think, many think that he's in the middle of a late life crisis. If you look at the time we believe it's written at a time of peace. And he had a lot of time on his hands. And he was trying to find satisfaction in his life. And he went and looked at the world around him. And he gave himself fully to different things in life. And in each case, he decided that they are vanity. It's chasing after the wind, or meaningless, depending on the translation you use. And then as soon as he will go to the marketplace and the temple and different places, he will put God in the picture and say some wonderful things that we will be glad to hear by the time he gets through 20, 30 verses. Because you know that's not true, and you want God in the picture to see things as they really are as a Christian. Some approach this book as the Christians seeking after contentment. Others approach it with people trying to find meaning in life. What's the purpose of their life? Looking at it from a counselor's point of view, what is it that I can do to fill that empty place in my life? And if we are fortunate enough, and I would be willing to bet that we are, to have been raised in a home where we knew we were loved, we were given responsibilities and held accountable. When we messed up, we were disciplined perhaps, but we were given the opportunity to learn from those lessons. And we came through those difficult teen years knowing that we couldn't wait to get away from home maybe, but we knew Mom and Dad were for us. They were on our side. And so you have a great level of self-love, self-esteem. And that being the case, you don't have that emptiness, hopefully, in your life. And as we're getting older, certainly we shouldn't now. But as you went into the 20s and 30s and hopefully before the 40s or 50s, those of us older, there's not an emptiness there. You're not chasing after external things to fill the void that's there, to give life meaning, to give you stability, if you will. But this is a book that encourages us to see things as they really are, come to a conclusion, and see how God makes them better, or how He rounds them out, so that when we see and experience these things with God in the picture, we can have purpose, we can feel great about our circumstances. It's what I would say, I think the reason I enjoy the book, though it's got some long verses of some negative thinking, I'm an optimistic realist. I think I see things as they really are, and this book encourages that, but I find a reason for optimism. I see things as they really are, but I find a reason for optimism, and Solomon does that. He forces that upon us as he takes us through this journey of his life. We will attach it easily to our life in principle. How many of you have ever been on a stationary bike or a treadmill for any length of time. If you get on there for 20 minutes and it tells you that you've walked 2 miles, you've raised your blood pressure, you've helped your cardio, you're tired, and you walk off and you hadn't left where you were. You're in the same place. And that metaphor fits this book. You're going to get on a treadmill or a stationary bike and you're going to just pedal and pedal and pedal and pedal, and then you're going to get off and you're in the exact same place you were. And some people think their life is that way. And that's why it's a good metaphor. He's going to tell us that we're a cog in a big wheel. Nothing really changes. Our life is pretty much like everyone else's, but there's lessons that he presents for us. And so it's a very intriguing, interesting book, if you will. Listen to Ecclesiastes 2, verse 24. This is a summation book, a summation statement, if you will, written after the first chapter, but I want us to begin with this. It's seeing the end of the story before you look at some of the story, perhaps. Jewish people read the book of Ecclesiastes during the annual Feast of Tabernacles. It's an autumn festival, harvest time, and this is part of their assignment. He wrote, "There is nothing better for a man that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God." Now that's the first positive after a difficult chapter. But God gives us life. He wants us to enjoy it. He wants us even to be fully engaged in whatever it brings to us. But it's from God. It's from God. And it's similar to what is said in other verses, but Psalm 16:11, there's a fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore. Those type of statements are there. Paul said that God gives us richly all things to enjoy. 1 Timothy 6:17. So it's a principle that's going to come up several times in this book. But knowing it's there lets you wait for it while he takes you on this journey from place to place, from people or groups of people to other groups of people. And then he puts God in the picture. And that's where we will learn those greater lessons. It's a book filled with wisdom. Solomon, one of the smartest guys who's ever lived, one of the richest. And because of that, he had time and money to pursue whatever he wanted to pursue in his search for fulfillment, in his search for betterment. Turn to Ecclesiastes 1 if you haven't already. The words of the teacher. If you have a study Bible, there's a notation, the leader of the assembly. There's not a good Hebrew word for what is being said there. It's translated teacher, preacher, or the proclaimer, or the leader of an assembly. And it usually chooses one that's more common to us. Son of David, king in Jerusalem. And when we get to chapter 2, we're going to see that this was a man filled with wisdom and filthy rich. So those four things point to Solomon, though his name is not in this book. Solomon is the author. All scholars associate him with that. Son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, or vanity. I'm using the NIV for two reasons. One, it's what I've used in studying this book. Two, there's nothing that's discredited in this book. There's no error ever alluded to. There's no error associated with it. And that's the case with the whole Old Testament, by the way. Except for about 37 verses in the New Testament, the NIV is fine. But because of 37 verses, it has a reputation from the past. But there's nothing in the Old Testament that should cause us to have concern. The word is hevel, H-E-V-E-L, the Hebrew word, and it's vanity or meaningless. That is translated depending on your translation. Meaningless or vanity. Vanity, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless or vanity. And that word is used 38 times. You know what it looks like? If you're to take that word and put it in the thoughts and the mind of a person who's saying it, it looks like this. You're just throwing your hands in the air and saying, now, you've done that, haven't you? You know how that would feel, don't you? Well, think that when you see the word vanity or chasing after the wind or meaningless. It's just throwing your hands up in the air. Frustration, acknowledgement, kind of upset perhaps, depending on how you do it or for the reason you do it. What does man gain from all his labor at which he toils under the sun? What is there that we gain when we work hard? Week after week, month after month, year after year. It's not talking about a day. It's talking about looking at a life and you wonder, what am I accomplishing? It's just vanity. Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. And he's telling us in verses 4 through 7, the world is telling us as individuals something. Nothing really changes. Nothing really changes. The sun rises and the sun sets, and it hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the north or to the south, and it turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. The days may be different, but they're still pretty much the same as far as the big picture. Rivers run, sun, moon, clouds. You get up, you go through a day, and the next day you're going to get up again. It's going to be very similar to what it was before. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. So it's a cycle. It's a nature cycle. It's a life cycle that Solomon is seeing, and he's saying, what do I gain? It's like these things. Every day, more days. Not much changes. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, or the ear is full of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. I heard when I was an associate minister, the second minister position I was in, many years ago it seems now, I listened to Chuck Swindoll every single day Monday through Friday, for about 3 years. When he was right on. Rarely did I disagree with him, but he was a textual speaker. And I enjoyed hearing him because I could learn from him, and I developed a conversational teaching style from him. And that's what my dad used, and that's who I knew I would probably be. And he talked about this one hits home when you're in your car and somebody drives up next to you with their windows up, and you can hear their music as if it's in your car. Boom, boom, boom. Their car shakes from the loudness of the music. And they would tell you, my ears can't get enough of it. His words, the ear is full of hearing. You can hear it with their windows up, your windows up. You can feel it. And they would say, but I can't hear it. And that's the principle that's real sometimes in life. We see something, but we don't see it. We hear something, but we don't hear it. And when we think we've had enough, our ears, our mind coming up with something brand new. Do you know it's impossible? Now you can refashion and reuse and come up with things using things already there, and that's what the geniuses do. But there's some material that they're using to come up with that new thing, if you will. Who comes up with anything new? They refashion and they rework and they use something else to put it together to perform another function. But Solomon is saying there's no real change in life. The days seem to run together. Our ears, our minds don't get enough, even though we think we would. There's really nothing new under the sun. And if you question that, before next Wednesday, come up with something new. If you would question, come up with something new. Ask someone, the brightest person you know, to come up with something new. Give them more than a week. Give them a year. Come up with something new. And he's saying, look, this is something new. It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. It's reusing or finding a different use or a new combination of old things as we would attach it to our life. There is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. Now, we have good memories, don't we? And history records information about people that lets us know about those of old. But as a whole, when we come and then when we leave, within a reasonable short period of time, there's no memory. There's no memory. The beauty of that is, and we've all seen it take place, when you go to a funeral, hopefully the person doing a eulogy or those sharing information about that person, they're remembering mostly the good. They're not bringing up the negative. That's the polite thing to do. But it's also the realistic thing to do. Because we've all accomplished some good in our life that we would like for that to be passed on, the good memories. And if we're all going to highlight the negative memories, would we want people to do that for us? Doing to others you would have them doing to you? Wouldn't you want them to find the good? Wouldn't you want them to deal with you, with your life that way? And that's what he's suggesting. So, that's his beginning, introducing us to a list of vanities, things he pursued that proved to be meaningless. Vanity, chasing after the wind. But this is something of a foundation upon which these other things are resting. Any reflections, comments, or just say amen? Has it worn you out so far? The verses can wear you out a little bit when you try to take them in and ponder them. It can be frustrating. It can be such as say, well, it's not that simple. Well, Solomon's going to make it more profound, but he's pulling away. He's making observations about life based on his wisdom, based on things he's already done, and he's projecting some things that he wants us to consider. Ecclesiastes 1, verse 12. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is under heaven. All that is done under heaven, What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are vanity, a chasing after the wind. 7 times, another word used in other translations, it's a vexation of spirit. It's just vexing the spirit to consider that. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. What is twisted, verse 15, cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. There are some situations in life daily that just can't be changed or altered or understood. Now, obviously, we know things that are crooked that can be straightened, but he's talking in principle. Some things are twisted and they're going to stay twisted. Some things are lacking and you can't count it with value. That's the idea. You can't attach value to something that's lacking in its principle. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. And again, this is a strong principle or a strong statement that points to Solomon as the author. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. It's telling us a couple of things we know, then we've got to figure out what he's teaching us. We know that wisdom is the use of knowledge. A lot of people know things, but how do they use what they know? Wisdom is the application or the use of the things you know. Solomon is the one that took 2 mothers fighting over a baby, and he says, well, we'll just cut it in half. He had the wisdom to know that the mother to whom birth comes would never let that happen to her child. The other, who cares? And so it was taken care of. His wisdom solved the problem that otherwise maybe couldn't have been solved. But he's saying, I had wisdom, I had knowledge. I started applying what I knew. I started applying it so that I would benefit from that knowledge, so that I would have the wisdom needed, if you will. I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom. but also madness and folly. There were times where it wasn't necessarily wise people, wise circumstances, so it would be seen as madness and folly, but he applied himself to deal with those things. And we are asked to do that many times in our life. But when it's said and done, it's chasing after the wind. With much wisdom comes much sorrow. Do you ever find yourself knowing things that you wish you didn't know? Information that doesn't make your life pleasant. It's kind of hard to hear. Maybe you're given wisdom that is based on statistics, and this number of people were asked this question and they answered this way. And so it's designed to give us information that can help us to be wise in life or in dealing with people. And when the survey is revealed, we kind of wish we didn't know that. Kind of wish I didn't think people would make those kinds of choices. Wisdom brings much sorrow. Knowledge, more grief. Sometimes you just know too much. You know things about people you didn't need to know. Now, I haven't experienced it here, so I'm not talking about anyone here. You can rest assured of that as far as my using you as the example. But I have been in circumstances to where people, some of them family members, people want to give me information. Do you remember Jane Smith at so-and-so? No, I don't. And when you say I don't know them or don't remember, it's if they don't care. They just need to tell you something about them. And you find yourself, I don't need that information. Stop. Well, I was just going to share that, and they want to tell you something else. I don't need that information. In my mind, it can be gossip. Not always, but it can be. I don't need that information. And they're just wanting to say something. Maybe you haven't seen them in a while. They're just trying to make conversation. But you don't need that information about Jane Smith that you don't even know. And in some ways, it's belittling her choices or something. Sometimes knowledge can just bring us to grief, he's saying. Too much knowledge, too much wisdom. It doesn't always have the response that you would think or want or need. And of course, I think we know that that's true in our life. Wisdom. Do you think you could ever be smart enough? We're going to deal with education later, so we won't deal with that specific now. Wisdom. What is it you want from the boss, from the leaders? What is it you want as much as anything else in your world? The ability to take information and make decisions that are fair and honest, equitable. Wisdom. It's not mentioned in leadership manuals sometimes, but it's implied with the characteristics that we look for, that we need. And he's saying, as you strive for knowledge, which gives you wisdom, it's a good thing. But sometimes you don't get, at the end of the day, you don't get the results that you thought you would get. Sometimes it's just not that way. Some things can't be changed. Straight, crooked, twisted, whatever, lacking, counted, the two things mentioned in verse 15. Again, principles. Let's go on. Chapter 2. I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine, with embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. He didn't just let go of himself. He's still trying to make wise decisions, but he gave in to that. I wanted to see what was worthless for men to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I knew people growing up who could not be serious about anything. They always were telling jokes, usually weren't very funny, usually making fun of groups of people, if you will. But in their effort to avoid seriousness, sometimes in their own life, they just tried to have a good time. They gave themselves over to having a good time. Pleasure, and all the things that you could add in your life that maybe can help you to find or have pleasure. The mentioning of wine and even silly things, folly, even doing silly things, even doing out of the ordinary things. But I dedicated myself to having a good time. And what did he tell us? Was it worthwhile? He'll answer it in a minute because he's going to mention next something that gave him pleasure. I guess what I want is, because time will preclude us and it runs together and we can't read 2.5 chapters to put it together as he does. That empty place that we have. When you do something that you just enjoy, and you come home, and you have to go back to work, and you look back at the last 2 or 3 days that had a great deal of pleasure and fun attached to it, does it last very long? Does it fill a hole, a void that maybe was there? Maybe going somewhere you thought it would be the best time you've ever had, and when you get there and then come back, you think, not so much. Terry and I use an expression, I think you do too. Don't set such a high expectation that nothing can reach it. Just enjoy what it is, make the most of it, but don't set high expectations for something. No motel, no vacation, no place, no person can meet the high expectations sometimes that we set. Seeking after a good time, pleasure from whatever it might be. It usually doesn't last. And we spent several $100s hoping it would. Well, then he said, I undertook great projects. And this is something designed to bring great pleasure. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. Now, what you're seeing is somebody who had money and he had the power to demand people work to accomplish these things. He didn't do it, others did it. There are times in the Old Testament when Josephus, the Jewish writer, would go back and tell us that there may have been 10,000 people who worked for a number of months to build something. That's mentioned one time in Scripture. And we just don't understand the manpower and the time that was involved. But they say that the things that Solomon brought about in the land around Jerusalem and wide areas around it were just amazing. Reservoirs to move water and parks and trees, fruit trees, water groves of flourishing trees. He said, I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well. The delights of the heart of man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. So it wasn't foolishness. His wisdom was used in these projects, and it was still there at the end of the projects. It wasn't just foolish actions or unworthy things. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was vanity, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. He derived in his mind no earthly value from having done it. Now remember, this is under the sun, with God out of the picture. God is not in the picture. He'll come in soon, but this is under the sun. No real earthly value derived from it. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head while the fool walks in the darkness, but I came to realize that the same lot or fate overtook them both. The wise man has better understanding. His life ought to be different. But what's the fate of both the wise man and the foolish man? What's our fate, our common fate? Death. Whatever you do, you're still going to die. Good or bad, light or darkness, you're going to die. Then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said in my heart, this too is vanity. For the wise man, like the fool, will not be long remembered. In days to come, both will be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise man too will die. Who's the smartest person you know? Is that person already dead? Did their smartness keep them alive? I'm going to tell you something that just is, I think about it often. I see people with all the money in the world. Don Sutton, the great Dodger pitcher, died, I think last night, maybe this morning. 75 years old. A multimillionaire from his sports past. Why did he die so young? When I see people not that much older than some of us, and you think to yourself, well, if I have all the money in the world, I ought to be in good health and have people to keep me in good health. What do we find out? It doesn't work that way. There's a whole lot of people not much older than us who aren't in good health, who have everything as a resource. We need to realize that. We need to admit that. It's reassuring to us in many ways. Thank you. I'm not going crazy up here, by the way. And we're going to use this mic up here. I had someone 5 or 6 years ago says, Gary, why are we studying Ecclesiastes? I said, the first reason is because it's a book of the Bible. It's a book in the Bible. Are we to apologize for studying a book that's in the canon of Scripture from God? But they'd never studied it, and they weren't sure what value there would be in it. That's the first reason. God has given us these books. There's value in them if we will take the time, spend the time learning what's there. Even the book of Leviticus, by the way, which I've never taught. I don't plan to. But I've read it. I've tried to learn from it. But anyway.